Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I think Clara Hemphill knows more about the public schools in this town than even the chancellor. Her books are indispensable guides to parents as they wend their way through the system to find the best school for their child, and also to those of us who want to know how good or bad public education is in this city. Welcome. So, what is your assessment? How good or bad are the public schools in this city?
There are a lot more good schools than most people know. We've seen a lot of improvements in the elementary schools in neighborhoods like Williamsburg, even East New York, and the South Bronx. There's still some really bad schools as well, unfortunately.
Yeah. Do you what's the Bloomberg administration? I mean, the mayor is run to say he's now responsible for the schools, and it became, instead of the Board of Education, it's the Department of Education. We have a chancellor, instead of a president of the board. What are the changes, and has it improved? It's both sides.
I think the mayor was very brave to say we're going to use an innovative, exciting curriculum. It's not going to be desks and rows anymore. It's not going to be boring textbooks. It's going to be real children's literature and lots of excitement in the classroom. What he's really trying to do is give the children of the South Bronx the same education that richer children have had in private school.
So did they really take, I mean, you really walk into an elementary school and you see in most of the classrooms desks and clusters and around?
That's right. There's almost
really
every classroom has a rug on the floor and a rocking chair.
And that's all new in the last 4 years?
Yes. The other thing they've done in the last 4 years is really flood the classrooms with books. So that instead of having just a few textbooks in a class, there's now wonderful children's literature, science discovery books.
That's really very impressive, because when you hear about the school system, you've always got critics and people who say, oh, it's a mess, it's more disorganized than it's ever been, it's this, it's that, class size is still too big, but you never hear about these other little things, and I know the difference an environment makes in the schools.
I'm a critic as well. I think there's a lot of drawbacks. Right. I think the mayor has been steadfast in not spending more money for schools. I think we do need a larger city share in the budget. However, at the same time, he hasn't cut the budget, which in previous administrations we'd seen a lot of budget cuts.
Does the size of a building, I mean, was our physical plant very disadvantageous to having a good school system?
The physical plants have really suffered since the fiscal crisis in the mid-'70s. They just haven't spent enough money on maintenance.
Is that the School Construction Authority, or is that the Department of Education?
I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah.
It's very confusing. So what are the changes they've made other than those changes? There's now a change in curriculum?
One of the things they've done is they've created more than 150 small new schools for high school. The feeling is that the big factory-style high schools just don't work. They're not even safe. Very few kids actually graduate from school. So that if you create small schools where every teacher knows every child, they have a better chance of graduating.
So we've got 150 of them, basically?
The problem is we tried to create these schools without building new buildings.
Yeah.
So that what happened was they created them inside old schools, the old buildings. They put maybe 4 schools inside of a big building. And there's some problems with the physical plants there.
And then
as well.
if each school has a different administrative person responsible for administering that school.
And they usually have one person in charge of the whole building.
Just the building part, not the curriculum.
That's right.
Is there now a uniform curriculum in all the schools?
I would say the curriculum is much more coherent than it was 5 years ago. Under the old system, every district, of the 32 districts, and even every school had their own way of doing things. Now there's much more consistency. For better, for worse.
And how many districts? They did change the districts. That's the part that I find the hardest to understand. I mean, I come from the west side of Manhattan, and it used to be District, what? 3.
Yeah.
And is it still called District 3?
Well, they did and they didn't. It's a little bit like the IRT and the number 6 and the IND. You know, the old timers still call it by the old numbers.
I always call it the Broadway subway because I don't know what else to call it. Yeah.
It's a little bit like that, too. I still say District 3.
Right.
Legally, the mayor did not have the power to eliminate the districts.
And those would be the local school boards?
Well, the school boards are gone, but the districts still exist.
I see. So what's happened? They've merged a couple of them together?
They've consolidated them into 10 regions. on paper.
And then they've moved to different places?
Some of them are in the same old district offices.
I see. And we no longer have a superintendent in each district, or do we still?
There are now 10 superintendents.
I see.
So a superintendent used to be in charge of 30 or 40 schools. He's now in charge of 150 schools.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
And is the high school system still separate, or is that part of the whole system?
That's part of the regional superintendents, too.
So now we have a more uniform curriculum, and is it a more progressive curriculum now, mandated for more schools?
Yes, it's interesting. It's a very top-down way to institute a progressive curriculum,
right,
which most teachers see as being a way to have their own creativity in the classroom. But it's a little funny when the people on top tell you have to do it this way.
So that's one of the reasons the teachers aren't sometimes as happy as they used to be? Do they feel their freedom has been curtailed?
It varies tremendously from neighborhood to neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard the most criticisms in Queens, which probably had the most traditional schools before, and also the most bossy top-down administration since the changes.
The conversion. And when we have this curriculum, we've brought in. Does every school teach a more progressive kind of math? Is it called balanced math? Is that what you say in these books?
I think the jury is still out on the math curriculum. They tried to do too many changes all at once, and most of the teachers are still grappling with the new ways of teaching reading and writing, and nobody's really got a grip on the new math curriculum.
One of the best parts of these books, and especially in the public elementary school, is the description of the different terms and what happens. So you have, you've got in the English, what do you call the reading, and it's a different system of reading now.
Whole language, phonics,
right.
balanced
so
literacy.
The whole language is where, what?
You hear a lot of jargon when you go on these
right.
school visits, and I tell parents, tune some of the jargon out and just watch and see if the kids are happy and
right.
engaged.
And in this book, you really describe it so people understand what they need to look for.
Yes.
Yeah. So they used to be taught phonetically. Is that what used to be?
The whole language phonics debates has been raging really for 100 years. Yeah. Whether children learn better by sounding out individual letters, which is called phonics, or whether they learn by looking at a whole text, a whole book rather than just a passage. That's called whole language. The truth is kids need both. Yeah. They need rich children's literature to read from, and they need to sound out letters.
So they need the books, basically.
They need the books.
And that's been a big change, that we have more interesting books and they're not reading from the classic class books where it was...
Everybody on the same book on the same page.
Who was it with Jane? Was it Jack and Jane?
Dick and Jane when I was a kid.
Yeah, right. And then you talk about, so we do the English, and you talk about the way they write, that they're learning are most of the kids learning to write very early? Is it earlier than they used to? And are they not doing the fancy penmanship that we used to be so famous for?
There's much more emphasis on learning to write an essay and much less on learning to form letters.
Right. So if you're a parent and you have a child who is ready for, we don't cover kindergarten, do we?
We have kindergarten.
You do?
Pre-kindergarten.
Pre-kindergarten.
Yeah.
And kindergarten is really part of an elementary school.
That's right.
Yeah. So if you have a child who's going to be 6 years old, before what?
If your child is 5, before December 31st, he or she is entitled to start school in September of that year.
So a parent should start looking now. If your child is going to be 5, when? In January? Is that
in December.
December.
That's right, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? I mean, how does somebody go about looking? They look first in their neighborhood for a school?
Every child is assigned a school according to his address, and you can find out what school that is if you call 311, if you call the city.
And that's called a what, a zone school?
A zone school or a catchment school. Some of these schools are very good, some of them are really terrible.
Yeah.
If you have a good school, there's no problem, you just register in the spring. If you don't have a good zone school, or if you want to look into the many options out there, then you should probably look at gifted and talented programs, charter schools, option schools, magnet programs. There's a whole variety of schools.
What's an option school?
An option school is a school that doesn't have a zone. It accepts kids from a wide geographical area.
Now, some of the zone schools will accept a child from outside the zone, but it would most likely be later on in the year, or is it after they've just found out whether people from their zone have filled the school up?
It's complicated. There's less choice than there used to be. A lot of these schools are filling up, and quite frankly, the Department of Ed is discouraging people from shopping around.
Yeah.
In Manhattan, I encourage parents to look in October and November. In Brooklyn, you can probably get away with December or January.
But it's such a key element in a child's development, right? The education they're going to get and the school they're going to go to. So how do you tell parents that you have this wonderful resource?
Well, being on television helps.
All right, that helps. And then we just have to get the word out, because it is such a morass. I mean, I have listened to people trying to find schools, and when I was in the city council, people would call and ask if I could help them get into a school, and I really never could very much, because I always wanted to keep myself separate also from the school business. But it's a very difficult, long, hard process. Is it very confusing when you go into the schools? What should you look for in a school?
I look at the children, see if they're engaged. Are they staring out at the window, or are they really listening to what's going on? Are they look at the classroom? Are there interesting books or just dull books? What do the bulletin boards look like? Read the children's work. It should be posted on the walls. If there isn't any children's work posted on the walls, I'd be wary.
Yeah. And then do most schools just let you come in?
Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
Most schools will have particular tour times in the fall or the winter, and if you don't get those tour times, you're in trouble. I encourage parents to go to a PTA meeting or to visit the school during open school week, or maybe in the spring when they have a fair or a street fair to raise money for the school. Those are good places to understand the culture of a school, to find out what the parents are like.
And then you talk to other people too, I guess, and learn from their experience as to what it's all about. When I went to school, a junior high school was a junior high school. I went to a school called Joan of Arc Junior High School, JHS 118 on 93rd Street. We had to line up in the yard in the morning. There was a monitor with each class. You couldn't talk. There was a charge book. You'd sign. They'd write the charge book if you were talking. We would no talking in the hall, and everything was done by really memorization. That's when I learned the prepositions of the English language in alphabetical order, which I still remember. Junior high schools are now called middle schools. When I went, it was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. It's now not that, right?
Now it tends to be 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. There was a revolution in middle schools probably 15 years ago based on new research into child development that showed that the whole junior high school, where you change classes every 40 minutes and you have 5 different teachers, really doesn't work for kids in this age group. What they need is longer time with fewer grown-ups. So in the middle schools, they tend to have maybe one teacher for humanities, for both English and history. It's a way to have fewer changes for the children, to get to know the teachers really well.
It's so how many are there of these schools?
Oh, there's probably 300 in the city now.
And you've listed them and you've investigated them. What happens? You go to the schools, your team goes, and are you always welcome into the place?
Well, they have police guards outside, so if they don't want you,
you don't get
it. You out.
And then, but you sort of can go. And how are middle schools are assigned in a different way? I know you have a cold and you're going to cough any minute, so just
middle schools. Some neighborhood middle schools are okay, but most of them are not. So you really have to shop around for middle school.
And how does a child goes into a school and they're in 5th grade, and then how do they get assigned to a middle school?
It's a nightmare. You have to visit 5 or 6 schools. You have to take, if you're a parent, you have to take some time off of work, that you have to take the child out of school for these tours. The good news is that there are more options than most people know.
But if you don't do this, what happens to your child?
Well, they do assign you at random, yeah.
I see. So that, and are they zoned also?
It depends on the neighborhood, but increasingly there are schools of choice rather than zoned middle schools.
So a parent really has to pay attention when your child is in the 5th grade. You have to start in September also?
Mm-hmm.
And then you go, and there are few schools that go 1st grade to 12th grade. Is that something that's increasing in style?
Well, there are 3 of them in the city, so
that's not very many. Right.
More typical is there's some 6 to 8 schools, there's some 6 to 12 schools, and there's some K to 8 schools.
So if you go to a 6 to 12, you're really eliminating the next stop, which then becomes the high school. But let's just talk about the middle schools for a while. They're more innovative schools? Are there more smaller middle schools now than?
That's right. One of the other problems with the old junior high schools is they were just gigantic. So you'd have 1,500, 2,000 kids. For an 11 or 12-year-old, that's really hard to get used to. One of the advantages of the new schools is that they are smaller. There may be 300 or 400, 500 children. And
they're in that compressed area where they're not still with the big kids, but they see a little bit older.
That's right.
So then the next step is high school.
Mm-hmm.
They're zoned also.
Increasingly, they're not.
They're not
zoned.
Zoned schools were large schools.
Most of them were large.
And about 10 years ago, they had many problems.
Oh, they still do have many problems. You still have zoned high schools in large areas of Queens and Staten Island, but excuse me, in the Bronx and Manhattan, they've been completely eliminated.
And that's interesting. So what is Brandeis High School, for instance?
Except for Brandeis.
I'm sorry.
Almost completely
I didn't mean to do that. Yeah. So let's talk about the high schools. What is the quality of high school education?
It's really a mixed bag. There are some gems, and there are places that are not even physically safe.
I mean, we all know about Stuyvesant and Bronx Science, and basically those 2 schools, in LaGuardia, which is performing arts, they're all tests, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there good middle schools good high schools that you can go to without a test?
Yes, there are, but you do need to apply
early.
You have to apply by December 8th, I think, is the deadline.
Oh, I see. All right. So, but you can find them, you think? You're optimistic about this?
Yes. Of the 150 schools that have opened, most of them are high schools. There's certainly half a dozen that we're very optimistic about.
The small schools that have been started, they're very young, so they have no track record.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you find when you go into them?
Well, the schools don't have a track record, but the principal and the teachers do. So I advise people to ask the principal where he was before, where she was before, what her vision is or his vision is for the school. Find out the level of experience of the teachers. So in some of the schools are brand new, but they have already, after a couple of weeks, have a sense that they're really going to work.
You think that a principal is very important to the quality of a school?
Absolutely critical.
And what I found always very confusing is principals union, teachers union, the Department of Education. How do they all work together?
Well, they don't, is the problem, isn't it? Yeah.
What is the principals union? I mean, in some of the schools, the principal can really choose the teachers or find a way to select the teachers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But generally, the teachers union doesn't like that method.
There's a provision of the teacher's contract that allows teachers with seniority to transfer into a school over the objections of the principal. So this is one of the reasons a school like Stuyvesant, for example, has very smart kids but may not have very smart teachers.
Oh, that's an interesting point. So explain, does that come out in your book?
Yes, one of the things I recommend that parents ask is, how do you hire your teachers? There's another provision of the contract of the teacher's contract called school-based option. This allows, if the group of teachers in the school agrees, they won't accept seniority transfers. Rather, when they hire new teachers, they'll interview them. And these schools tend to have higher quality teaching. So I recommend parents ask, how do you hire your teachers? Do you use seniority or do you interview them?
How do they get that option?
They vote. The teachers vote for it.
The teachers who are in the school?
Mm-hmm.
But suppose if it's a new school, then how does it organize?
There's another provision of the contract that governs how the new schools hire teachers. It depends whether they're in a new building or an old building. But it's certainly worth asking when you visit a school.
Is the teachers union This is a terrible question. Is it a good thing to have?
Well, without the teachers' union, they'd probably have even lower wages, and
Yeah.
we'd probably have an even harder time attracting teachers. So generally, I think teachers need to be well paid, and without the union, they would be very badly paid. However, there are certainly provisions of the teachers' contract that I disagree with. Whether you blame the teachers for that contract or management, they both signed on to it.
Yeah. How much lower are our teachers paid than other communities?
Our teachers are paid, I think, about 25% less than surrounding communities, which makes it very difficult in neighborhoods like the Bronx, where teachers can go to Westchester.
Easily travel. And we, I mean, don't you think there's a will, though, to pay teachers more?
I think as a city, we need to build support for higher taxes for schools, which we haven't had so far. Raising teacher salaries, building new buildings, lowering class size, these are very, very expensive.
It's interesting because our property tax, which is the form in many communities of financing the schools, right? I mean, I think New Jersey, the property tax is basically the major source of revenue. I may be wrong, but the city property tax, I don't think goes at all to education. It goes into the general fund.
That's right. Our system of taxation is quite different.
And we have very high property taxes. So it's really
well, we have
too bad.
if you have an apartment, we have very high taxes. If you have
Yeah.
a house, you have very low taxes.
Right, except that people are now complaining because they're getting a big increase this year or something. They've always tried to bring it up, or not really. But it is a question of political leadership then, to
Yes.
say, I mean, education is such the basic thing for a productive society. And it's really a crime that we don't see it that way. And it starts with early childhood education, right?
I think one of the things that's happened in the suburbs is that the middle class has used the public schools.
Right, I see.
And they demand good public schools, and they're willing to pay for them. In New York City, too often the schools are seen as the place where poor people go, and that the upper middle class and rich send their kids to private school. One of the things that we're trying to do at our website, insideschools.org, is to build an alliance between working class and poor parents and upper middle class parents to fight together for more funding for schools.
Do you think that with the development of the smaller schools that we may attract more affluent parents to the school system?
I think one of the big benefits of the small schools is attracting good teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're seeing some idealistic young teachers coming from across the country to teach in the Bronx. I think there's a lot of excitement there, and that these teachers are happy to teach in the small schools rather than the large schools.
So then if you have the better teachers, then you have a better school, then you'll attract more people.
Yes.
So we do it. It's interesting because I think there's also a backlash about private schools, that children are so privileged, and there's so much a display of money and privilege. I mean, expensive vacations and all kinds of extra things, that hopefully maybe that would turn some people back to the public school system.
The other problem is just a shortage of space in the private schools. I think the suburbs were built for a time when women were home and men took the 5 o'clock train to be out in the suburbs. Now, with women working and men working longer hours, I think families who once might have moved to the suburbs are now choosing to stay in the city instead. There's a huge baby boom in the city, and that's putting pressure on enrollment in both private schools and public schools.
Now, you're not an educator by training.
No, I'm a journalist.
And how did this happen? Although I think I can guess.
Well, I was pregnant with my second child when my former employer, New York Newsday, went out of business. And like a lot of parents of small children, we were trying to decide, do we stay in Manhattan, do we move to Brooklyn, do we move to the suburbs? And although I had been a reporter for many years, I couldn't get information out of the Board of Ed. And I thought if I had trouble, other people did too.
Well, that was really a smart decision, because these are really incredible books. When you were a journalist, you were on the editorial board at New York Newsday, and before that you were a foreign correspondent. It's very exciting. So how do the schools compare? Is it as exciting?
Oh, I love taking the M train to Bushwick. And I love, when I did the first book, I would go to all the different immigrant communities across Queens and Brooklyn and come back with takeout from different neighborhoods, from all the different cuisines of the country.
What's the school at Jackson Heights that's so famous that has so many different languages spoken in it?
Maybe it's 69. There's a couple of them.
Yeah. And that is, of course, one of the greatest advantages of the city public school systems, when you can find a school that represents all the different people who are living in the city. I mean, there's nothing like New York City, is there, for its ethnic diversity, and just to walk down the street and see all these different people, different colors, different hairs, different anything. And when you can find that in a school and the school is running well, you really can't ask for anything more, can you?
It's a very rich experience for children, I think, to learn about all the different countries.
Now, you have a website. How many people look at that website, do you
The
think?
website is www.insideschools.org, and we have about 200,000 visitors every month.
And people are really learning how to navigate the system.
We've been to just about every school in the city. It's a 2,000-page website. In addition to our reviews of schools, we also have parent comments, which can give you a three-dimensional view of the school, what parents think about, not just what we think.
And this is all part of Advocates for Children, which is another nonprofit organization that I think by its title looks to protect the interests of children.
Yes, Advocates for Children offers a wide range of advocacy, legal support, help for new immigrants, children with special needs.
And they can also find that on the internet.
That's right.
Well, Clara Hemphill, I think on behalf of all the people who want to know about the public school system and on parents and prospective parents, your job is a wonderful job and you are doing it very well. And these are the 3 books, the public elementary school, middle school, and public high school. Thank you very much. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.